Greetings, friends. Today's story will tell you about a man whose name has become a symbol of crime and lawlessness. Percy Johnson was a criminal genius, the leader of one of the most feared gangs in America. His ability to elude the police and his audience with the world of crime inspire admiration and fear. Let's figure out together today how he managed to remain free, robbing large objects and stealing huge sums of money. In the deep hills of Arkansas, in the small town of Little Rock, Percy Johnson was born. His parents, humble farmers, gave him a simple but warm childhood. Percy had many brothers and sisters, and every day on the farm was full of joy and laughter. But even from childhood, it was clear that something was different about Percy. He was persistent and knew how to find a way out of any situation. His parents were proud of him, but at the same time they were worried. Where would their restless son grow up? As time passed, Percy became more determined and purposeful. At the age of 18, he left his parents' home, deciding to try his hand outside the borders of Arkansas. After several years of wandering and hard work, he found himself in New Orleans, a city where dreams became reality and opportunities seemed limitless. In New Orleans, Percy plunged into a world of crime. He became part of the city's criminal subculture, where every day was filled with danger and excitement. Percy quickly learned to survive in this world, and his wits and cunning made him respected among other criminals. But Percy wasn't just a street hoodlum. He saw crime as an opportunity to fulfill his dreams of wealth and power. He began planning ambitious criminal operations that could bring him incredible wealth and power. After Percy left his parents' home at the age of 18, he began his career with petty pickpocketing. He was young and ambitious, and his passion for theft made him feel alive. With each successful theft, his confidence in his abilities grew. But Percy soon realized that in order to achieve more, he needed to move on. He began to look for ways to a larger and more profitable criminal business. Gradually, he infiltrated the circles of more serious criminals and learned new skills, from hacking security to planning complex robberies. Each new successful operation brought Percy more money and respect among his peers. He became known as a man who could arrange any business. But at the same time, he understood that his thirst for adventure and passion for criminal activity did not subside. And so, when Percy reached a certain position in the world of crime, he decided on his most ambitious feat, robbing a train carrying valuable cargo. This was the challenge he had been waiting for all his life, and he was willing to do anything to achieve his dream of wealth and power. One of the key members of Percy's team was Jack Harris, an experienced burglar and security specialist. Jack was a tall man with rough features, but his eyes sparkled with intelligence and cunning. He was known in the world of crime for his unique skills and ability to hack any security system. Jack and Percy met several years ago in New Orleans, when Jack was hired to crack a safe in one of the rich mansions. Percy was impressed by his professionalism and determination, and they quickly hit it off. Since then, they have become inseparable friends and reliable partners in criminal matters. Jack was not only a hacking and security virtuoso, but also a trusted ally. His composure and ability to remain calm in the most difficult situations made him a valuable member of the team. Together with Percy, they overcame many trials and dangers, and each time their friendship only became stronger. Jack was one of the people Percy could trust completely. His experience and professionalism were invaluable during the train robbery, and his presence gave the rest of the team confidence in the success of the operation. Together, they were invincible. Another key member of the team was Eddie Smith, known in the world of crime as the electronic brain. Eddie was a computer and hacking genius. He was short, with a messy hairstyle and unruly hair, but his eyes always sparkled with intelligence and ingenuity. Eddie became part of Percy's team after they met on one of the criminal forums on the internet. Percy was impressed by Eddie's intelligence and abilities, and invited him to join the team to carry out ambitious criminal operations. Eddie was not only a great hacker, but also a useful ally in other ways. His knowledge of modern technology and computer systems was limitless, and he could always find a way out of the most difficult situations. His composure and ability to keep a low profile made him a valuable asset to the team. Eddie and Percy were like two close friends, willing to do anything for their goals. Their teamwork was extremely effective, and each time they proved that together they were invincible. With Eddie on board, Percy's team felt more confident and ready to take on the most ambitious tasks. The third important member of the team was Jake Parker, known as the Navigator. Jake was an expert in route research and analysis. He was tall and thin, with cunning eyes that always saw far ahead. Jake joined Percy's team after they met at a crime meeting in New York. His knowledge of transport routes and travel planning was impeccable, and Percy immediately knew that he was essential to the success of their operations. Jake was not only an expert in his field but also a good strategist. His ability to anticipate possible scenarios and analyze risks made him an indispensable member of the team. Together with Percy, they could plan and carry out even the most difficult missions with ease. Jake and Percy were like complementary parts of one whole. Their work together was so coordinated that they could read each other like an open book. With Jake on board, Percy's team could be confident that their operations would be carried out with maximum efficiency and minimal risk. The fourth member of the team was Emilio Sanchez, known as the Shadow. Emilio was a master of spying and surveillance. He was a tall, slender young man with sharp features and dark eyes that always seemed full of mystery. Emilio joined Percy's team after they met at a dangerous event in Miami. His skills in espionage and information gathering were highly valuable to the team, and Percy immediately realized that he was needed to successfully carry out their operations. Emilio was a master of stealth and camouflage. He could sneak into the most secure locations without attracting attention and gather valuable information that would help the team develop action plans. His ability to infiltrate and deceive was invaluable to the team. Together with Percy, Emilio was able to plan and carry out even the most dangerous missions with ease. Their understanding and trust in each other was so strong that they could look at each other without words and know that their goals were completely aligned. With Emilio on board, Percy's team was prepared for the most unpredictable situations and ready to act at a moment's notice. Last, but certainly not least, was Jimmy "Rough Arm" McCarthy. Jimmy was an expert at doing the dirty work, physical and violent acts. He was a short, strong man with muscular arms and a serious gaze that made others tremble in fear. Jimmy joined Percy's team after they met in the cell block. His reputation as a hard worker who could do any dirty job was well known in the world of crime, and Percy knew immediately that he was needed to ensure the success of their operations. Jimmy was a master of physical violence and intimate handling of weapons. He could take on any task, be it protecting the team during an operation or removing obstacles in their path. His strength and fearlessness made him an indispensable asset to the team. Together with Percy, Jimmy was able to plan and carry out even the most dangerous missions with ease. Their mutual trust and understanding of each other was so strong that they could act as one in any situation. With Jimmy on board, Percy's crew was prepared for the toughest challenges and knew they could rely entirely on their trusted comrade. Over time, the Gang of Six, led by Percy Johnson, began to do more and more daring and ambitious criminal acts, causing a lot of trouble for America. Their operations became legendary in the world of crime. The combination of the unique skills of each team member allowed them to carry out incredibly complex and outrageous plans that even the most experienced criminal could dream of. The gang robbed banks, robbed jewelry stores, broke into safes and casinos, and stole works of art and valuable antiques. They staged daring robberies on the streets of major cities and intercepted valuable cargo on roads and railways. Their successes attracted the attention not only of the police, but also of criminal organizations wishing to control the underground world. But the gang was not afraid of anyone or anything. They were absolutely confident in their abilities and ability to succeed in any situation. But with each new crime, the risks became higher. The police began to actively pursue the gang, and criminal authorities sought to destroy their roots. But Percy and his team were ready for any challenge and were ready to continue their path to wealth and power, no matter what. The gang, led by Percy Johnson, quickly became known as one of the most dangerous and daring criminal groups of the 20th century. Their criminal operations became a legend in the world of crime. Their names began to scare even the most courageous people. The gang's numerous successes aroused respect and fear at the same time. They carried out robberies with impeccable precision and professionalism, leaving no chance for the police and security guards. Their plans were so cunning and sophisticated that the police were often powerless against them. Despite all the efforts of law enforcement agencies, the gang continued to evade arrest and avoid punishment. Their skills and professionalism allowed them to act as if they were untouchable. Their audacity and recklessness made them truly invincible. But with each new crime, the risks became higher and the police became more persistent in their attempts to catch them. The gang knew that each next crime could be their last, but they were willing to risk everything for their goals. Their story became legendary in the world of crime, and is still remembered today as one of the most exciting and daring criminal acts of the 20th century. The Percy Johnson gang has left its mark on history as consummate criminal masters and the epitome of danger to society. Percy Johnson's gang has long been planning their legendary crime, which will be a weapon for their reputation in the underworld. They decided on something that no one could ever forget. Their target was one of the most secure government vaults in the country, where not only millions of dollars were stored, but also the most valuable jewelry and antiques. Percy and his team spent months in secret, studying every detail of the plan. They developed innovative security hacking techniques, an escape plan, and a path to freedom after committing a crime. They were ready for anything. Soon they found themselves in front of the doors of the government storage facility. With each step, they overcame new obstacles, but their professionalism and solidarity kept them together. Soon they found themselves in front of the doors of the government storage facility. Using Eddie's hacking skills, they got inside, bypassing all security systems. Jack broke into the safe and they gained access to the treasure. But that was only the beginning. They were able to evade the police and get away with their loot. Their legendary crime was carried out successfully. Their name will go down in history as one of the most daring and impressive crimes ever committed in America. For Percy Johnson's gang, this robbery became a real challenge and a test of their abilities. This was one of the first big cases they took on, and they were ready to prove their worth in the underworld. Percy and his team spent months in preparation, studying every detail of the plan and searching for weak spots in the target's security. They knew that their success in this case would determine their future reputation in the world of crime, and they were willing to go to any lengths to achieve success. Their target was one of the largest banking institutions in the city, where millions of dollars in cash and securities were stored. The gang was determined to get in and take their share. When the moment of action arrived, the gang acted coherently and professionally. Using Eddie's hacking skills, they entered the bank and bypassed all security systems. Jack was able to crack the safe, and they gained access to valuable resources. The robbery was successful, and the gang were able to get away with their loot, evading the police and any attempts to stop them. This was the first big success for Percy Johnson's gang, which established them as one of the most daring and professional criminal groups in America. They were able to steal more than $5 million from the treasury. This was a huge amount of money that could establish the Percy Johnson gang as one of the richest and most powerful in the underworld. Let's imagine how this could happen. Percy and his team staged a cunning bank robbery that allowed them to gain access to the treasury and steal a huge amount of money. Using their unique skills and professionalism, they entered the bank, bypassing all security systems, and were able to get to the treasury itself. Jack, with the help of his hacking experience, managed to break into the safe, and they discovered a huge amount of cash dollars and securities. It was a huge haul that could change their lives forever. Despite the best efforts of the police and security, the gang was able to get away with their loot, evading any attempts to stop them. Their success in this case established them as one of the richest and most powerful gangs in the underworld. Their name became legendary and their crime remembered for years to come. After the successful robbery, Percy Johnson's gang thought they had avoided leaving evidence behind. They were confident that all traces were visible and eliminated, and the police would not be able to link the crime to them. But just as they began to enjoy their spoils, new circumstances suddenly intervened. Several months after the robbery, during the investigation, the police discovered some new evidence that led them to Percy's gang. Percy and his gang were stunned. They were sure that they had done everything to cover their tracks after the robbery, but it seems that they miscalculated. The police began a thorough investigation, checking every possible witness statement and analyzing every little detail related to the crime. The gang soon realized that they would have to act quickly before the police could find reliable evidence against them. This may have been their most difficult test so far, not only stealing the money, but also making sure no one could link it to the crime. Realizing that the police were getting closer to solving their crime, Percy Johnson's gang made a bold decision. They decided to leave their previous places of residence and move to New York, where they could find a new shelter and hide from the law. Arriving in New York, the gang began to live quietly, avoiding drawing attention to their person. They changed their appearance, used false names, and tried not to attract too much attention. The new city gave them the opportunity to start over with a clean slate and forget about their past crimes. However, their ambitions and thirst for criminal activity were still strong. Living in the shadows, the gang continued to plan new crimes that could bring them even more wealth and power. New York provided them with endless opportunities for criminal activity, and they were ready to use them for their own purposes. Thus, the move to New York was a new beginning for the Percy Johnson gang. They used this as an opportunity to start over and continue their journey to the top of the criminal world. One day, on the streets of New York, Percy Johnson's gang committed their most ambitious and audacious robbery. It was here, in the heart of American crime, that they decided to carry out their dream plan, to rob the largest bank in the city. Using their unique skills and unparalleled professionalism, the gang planned the perfect crime. They studied every detail, every move, every moment to make sure everything would go flawlessly. When the moment of action arrived, the gang acted harmoniously and coordinatedly. They entered the bank, bypassed all security systems, and overcame any obstacles in their path. Jack made easy work of the safe, and they gained access to a huge amount of money. This robbery was not only the largest in the history of the Percy Johnson gang, but also one of the most ambitious and impressive in the history of New York. They were able to evade the police and escape with their loot, leaving behind only the legend of their daring crime. This robbery established the Percy Johnson gang as one of the most notorious and dangerous in the underworld, and their name became a symbol of ambition and fearlessness. Percy and his gang decided that in order to rob the largest bank in New York, they would need a proven and cunning plan. After many days of deliberation and study of the area, they came to the following plan. Step 1. Exploration and study. They spent several weeks studying the bank's location, security systems, and operating procedures. They found that the bank usually transfers large amounts of cash on Monday evenings to cover customers for the weekend. Step 2. Preparation. The gang acquired parts to carry out the plan: masks, weapons, an escape vehicle, etc. They also found a suitable location for temporary shelter and an evacuation plan. Step 3. Implementation. On Monday evening, when the bank had already closed, a heavily armed gang burst inside. They quickly and professionally disarmed the guards and forced the bank staff to open the safes. Step 4. Escape. With the loot in hand, the gang quickly left the bank and boarded a previously prepared vehicle. They used alternate routes to avoid the police and fled to safety. Step 5. Split and hide. After the successful robbery, the gang split up and fled to various hideouts. They agreed to meet a few days later to divide the spoils and discuss future plans. This plan turned out to be a perfect fit for Percy Johnson's gang, and they were able to successfully pull off a heist that became legendary in the underworld. Confident in their plan, Percy Johnson's gang moved forward with confidence, knowing that planning and cold-blooded execution would leave little evidence for the detectives and police. By the time they pulled off their Audacity bank robbery in New York, all the best detectives and police were already on high guard. However, their meters were inconclusive. Percy Johnson's gang were masters of evading the law. They ensured their heist left virtually no trace. The masks they wore hid their faces, and strategically chosen temporary hiding spots ensured their anonymity. Without modern technology such as CCTV cameras, DNA testing, or cell phone tracking, detectives and police were limited in what they could do. Instead, they were forced to rely on their professionalism, careful questioning of witnesses, and analysis of available information. Despite their best efforts, they encountered a solid wall. Percy Johnson's gang remained at large, and their robbery became more legendary with each passing day. It was a challenge like no other for the detectives and police, as their tenacity and perseverance were put to the test in this fight against ruthless criminals. With each passing day, the Percy Johnson gang continued to remain at large, and the police faced new challenges in the investigation. However, they did not give up. The best detective minds in the country worked day and night to find any clues that could lead to the gang. Their investigation was carried out with passion and thoroughness. Detectives examined every corner of the city, interrogated witnesses, and checked alternative versions of events. They looked at CCTV footage, even if it wasn't much, and looked for any clues about the perpetrators. But despite their best efforts, they could not find any concrete evidence that could lead to the gang. Percy Johnson's gang were masters at staying on the edge of the shadows, hiding from the law like smoke. Every day the crime became more mysterious and mysterious. The gang managed to maintain their anonymity and avoid punishment, and their robbery became a legend in the underworld. For detectives and police, it was a setback that turned into a challenge. They continued to fight, hoping that one day they would be able to find the key to solving this mystery and bring the criminals to justice. Events dragged on over time, and Percy Johnson's gang, although they were on the verge of destruction, was not going to give up. They hid again, changing their location, and tried to remain undercover. The police, overwhelmed by a fierce desire to catch these criminals, continued an active search. Detectives used all available resources and methods to find the gang. They scoured the streets, analyzed data, interviewed witnesses, and worked on every possible lead. However, despite all efforts, the police were faced with what seemed impossible. Percy Johnson's gang had disappeared without a trace. Even using all available technologies and search methods, they could not find a single hint of the criminals. It was a defeat for law enforcement, and another heavy blow to their reputation and self-esteem. They felt that the criminals, armed with knowledge and confidence in their actions, had once again eluded them. For Percy Johnson's gang, this was a temporary relief. They understood that this period of time without persecution was valuable, but their determination and ambition did not allow them to remain in place. They knew that sooner or later they would have to go hunting again, but for now they could enjoy relative peace and quiet. The police, although faced with difficulties in catching Percy Johnson's gang, did not relax. They knew that the criminals could not disappear forever and were waiting for the moment when they would take their next step. Every day they were on alert, ready to act if any evidence or hints about the gang appeared. During this time, Percy Johnson's gang remained on the side. They realized that any carelessness could be their last, so they acted with extreme caution. They had to temporarily suspend their criminal operations and concentrate on maintaining their anonymity and not getting caught by the police. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and the tension grew with each day that passed. And then, suddenly, the police received information about possible gang activity in one of the city areas. This was their first step after a long silence. The police immediately responded to this information by sending their forces to the place. They stayed in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to act, hoping that this might be the key to catching the gang. Percy Johnson's gang decided to change their usual routine and commit a more daring and unexpected crime. They realized that the police always expected them to attack banks or jewelry stores again, and decided to use this against them. Thus, they planned to rob a train carrying money. This was a riskier and more difficult undertaking, but they were confident that it would help them bypass the police's expectations and surprise them again. Before carrying out the robbery, Percy Johnson's gang prepared thoroughly, studying all possible scenarios and developing a plan of action down to the smallest detail. They knew that every minute of their life inside the train would be critical, and they would not make any mistakes. And then the day came when the gang carried out their audacity train robbery. Their training and professionalism allowed them to cope with unforeseen difficulties and successfully take possession of the loot. This move was sudden and unexpected for both the police and the public. The Percy Johnson gang once again demonstrated their courage and ingenuity, and their name began to be discussed everywhere. But at the same time, the police were shocked by such an unpredictable turn of events and were forced to reconsider their investigative methods. A train carrying valuables from New York to Washington became the target of Percy Johnson's gang. They understood that robbing such a train was not only daring, but also required good preparation. The gang began to study the route, transportation features, and security scheme. Having gathered all the necessary information, the gang developed a daring plan that involved hacking the security system, intercepting a train in a remote location, and quickly disappearing with the loot. They knew they only had one chance and decided to make the most of it. Accordingly, the gang was divided into groups, each of which was responsible for its own part of the operation. They studied the train's layout, understood its vulnerabilities, and developed a strategy of action. When the day of the robbery arrived, Percy Johnson's gang was ready. They acted quickly and in a coordinated manner, hacking security systems and hijacking the train. Their well-thought-out plan worked, and they were able to take possession of the loot. This robbery became one of the most daring and successful in the history of the criminal world. Percy Johnson's gang demonstrated their professionalism and composure, leaving behind only mystery and admiration for their courage. Reconnaissance. Percy Johnson's gang began with a thorough reconnaissance of the train's route, studying its schedule, stopping points where the train was most vulnerable, and security features. Preparation. Knowing that they would have to act quickly and coordinatedly, the gang prepared special tools for hacking security systems, weapons for self-defense and escape, and vehicles for quickly escaping from the crime scene. Site selection. They chose a remote section of the route where the train would pass through open spaces devoid of mass populations and observers. Attack. While the train was in a secluded area, the gang suddenly attacked it, blocking the routes and seizing control of the train. They used their security hacking tools to gain access to the safes and valuables inside. Quick escape. After securing the loot, the gang quickly left the train and boarded pre-arranged vehicles to evade pursuit. They used alternate routes to avoid the police and fled to safety. On the evening of April 4, 1989, Percy Johnson's gang suddenly struck, jumping onto a train and knocking out the guards and driver. Their actions were quick and cool, their goal being to take control of the train before any passengers could call for help. Using their skills and professionalism, the gang quickly took control of the situation, blocking traffic routes and threatening them with weapons. They broke into safes and stole valuables carried by the train, including jewelry and money. Having loaded the loot, the gang left the train and boarded previously prepared vehicles to leave the crime scene. Their quick escape was also part of their plan to avoid pursuit and leave confusion and chaos around. This robbery became one of the loudest and most daring in criminal history, and the Percy Johnson gang became a legend in the world of crime. Their name became a symbol of courage and professionalism, and this robbery remained in the memory of people as one of the most audacity and successful in history. After a successful train robbery, Percy Johnson's gang were able to quickly disappear from the scene using a carefully planned escape route. They fled to a safe place where police and detectives could not find them. After the robbery, the disappearance of the gang caused shock and concern among law enforcement agencies. Extensive investigations were launched, but the leads were confusing and inconsistent. The gang managed to remain free while the police faced obstacles and false leads. However, even after a thorough investigation and extensive search, the Percy Johnson gang remained at large. Their unique skills, strategies, and organization allowed them to escape punishment and continue their criminal activities while remaining on the right side of the law. The train robbery of April 4, 1989 remained in history as one of the most daring and successful crimes of its kind. The Percy Johnson gang became legends, and their name was famous in the underworld, continuing to attract interest and admiration for their courage and professionalism. After the train robbery, the police immediately began to investigate. They knew that time was against them, and every minute was valuable in their search for Percy Johnson's gang. The police investigated the crime scene, collecting any available information and evidence. However, at the beginning of the investigation, there were few concrete leads that could lead to the gang. Police began by reviewing all possible video footage and witness statements to uncover any details about the robbery. They also analyzed the escape route and places where the gang could hide. Each piece of information was costly, and police worked around the clock to identify any patterns or connections. Gradually, through incredible diligence and careful work, the police began to put together the pieces of the puzzle. They found some inconsistencies in the witness statements and also found some leads that could lead to the gang. While Percy Johnson's gang remained at large, the police were persistent and relentless in their desire to bring them to justice. And although it was not easy, the police were not going to give up until they caught these criminals and brought them before the law. When the train robbery case began to become more and more complicated, one of the best American detectives, Jack Holland, was sent to the scene. His reputation preceded him, and his name was widely known in law enforcement circles for a number of successful investigations that led to the unraveling of complex criminal schemes. Jack Holland was famous not only for his professional skills, but also for his unwavering confidence and ability to solve the most difficult mysteries. He was known for his detailed work methodology and careful analysis of evidence. Arriving at the scene of the robbery, Jack Holland got to work immediately. He examined the crime scene, interviewed witnesses, and analyzed available evidence to identify patterns and clues that could lead to the Percy Johnson gang. Jack Holland was persistent and determined, and he knew that this case represented one of the most difficult challenges of his career. But he was determined to go all the way to bring the criminals to justice and return the stolen valuables. Even with his outstanding experience and unmatched skills, Detective Adrian Cross had a difficult time leading the investigation surrounding this train robbery. Despite a thorough examination of the crime scene and interrogation of witnesses, no evidence was found. All there was a lot of unanswered questions and the feeling that Percy Johnson's gang had skillfully disguised their trail. Detective Cross knew time was against him, so he persisted in his investigation. He studied every detail, reviewed every aspect of the case, looking for hints and connections that could lead to the criminals. However, Even despite his efforts, Detective Adrian Cross found it difficult to locate key clues. Percy Johnson's gang were professional and careful, and their tracks were well erased. Despite this, Detective Cross did not give up. He knew that the resolution of this case was important not only for the law, but also for society as a whole. He continued to work tirelessly, ready to use every opportunity to bring the matter to an end and bring to justice those who committed this daring and audacity crime. As the police's hopes began to fade, an unexpected call from the old man brought new hope. He reported a discovery in his small forest: jewelry, money, and various valuables. This was a possible breakthrough in the investigation. The police immediately responded to this call, sending their forces to the location of the discovery. When they reached the forest, they were amazed at the scale of the discovery. There, among the trees and bushes, jewelry, money, and other valuables related to the train robbery were discovered. This discovery sparked a new wave of enthusiasm and energy in the investigation. The police began to carefully investigate the location of the discovery, collecting any available information and evidence. They used every detail to try to reconstruct what happened and find out who was behind this daring crime. This discovery also attracted the attention of Detective Adrian Cross, who immediately joined the investigation. He knew that this discovery could be the key to solving the case, and he was ready to use all his skills and experience to find the criminals and bring them to justice. The police and Detective Cross began a thorough examination of all discovered items. They sent them for examination to find evidence and fingerprints that could lead to the culprits. Among these items was a cassette tape that could contain important information about the crime. Experts analyzed the tape with special attention. After several days of intensive research, they were able to extract the data from the tape. And what was found on this tape was unexpected. The tape contained a recording in which conversations related to the train robbery were heard. This was a real breakthrough in the investigation. The recording contained conversations between Percy Johnson's gang about the details of the crime, plans, and distribution of the loot. This material became the key to solving the case. The police and Detective Cross used this information to identify the criminals and find evidence that would lead to their arrest. Now, with new evidence in hand, the police were closer to finding and bringing to justice Percy Johnson's gang. Having received the second tape, detectives hoped to find additional evidence on it or even see the faces of the criminals. However, when they played the contents of the second tape, they discovered that it contained footage from adult films. This disappointed them as they had hoped for more. But they quickly realized that researching this tape was also important. Even though this footage was not related to the crime, it could contain some information or clue that would help in the investigation. Detectives decided to carefully analyze each frame on the tape, hoping to discover something that could be connected to the case. They studied every detail, every face on the screen, every scene, looking for any sign or evidence that might lead them to a trail. Although the process was long and tedious, the detectives did not give up. They knew that sometimes clues lie in the most unexpected places, and they were determined to go through every frame on this tape to find any useful information. An ordinary grandmother named Elizabeth came to the local police station with an incredible testimony. She said that a few days ago 2 men rented an apartment in her building. Elizabeth described them as strange. They were dressed in old clothes, but in their hands she noticed a wad of money. This incident aroused the grandmother's suspicion, and she decided to contact the police. She clarified that the men looked illegal, and her suspicions increased when she learned about the latest crimes in the area. The police were excited by this new evidence and immediately began to act. They went to the apartment the men had rented to conduct a search and check on the suspects. During the search, police found a large amount of cash, as well as other items that could be related to the robberies. This was a key point in the investigation, and the police immediately arrested 2 suspects. As the investigation continued, Detective Adrian Cross discovered that the evidence led them to Percy Johnson's gang. This was a turning point in the case, and the police were on their way to solving one of the most notorious robberies in history. When the police arrested two suspects, Jack Harrison and Edie Smith, they were shocked and unhappy. They maintained their innocence, but the evidence was against them, and the police were convinced that they were members of the Percy Johnson gang. Detective Adrian Cross interviewed the suspects in an attempt to determine their involvement in the robberies. Both suspects tried to hide their connection to the gang, but Detective Cross was persistent and used all his skills to extract the truth from them. With each new interrogation, it became clear that Jack Harrison and Edie Smith were indeed members of the Percy gang. Johnson. They admitted their involvement in the robberies and revealed some details of the organization of the gang and its activities. This arrest was a huge success for the police and Detective Cross. He confirmed their belief that they were on the right path to solving the case. Now they had to use the information obtained from those arrested to find and arrest the remaining members of the Percy Johnson gang and bring them to justice for their crimes. Despite the best efforts of the police and Detective Cross, Jack Harrison and Edie Smith remained silent regarding their partners. They refused to reveal the names and information about other gang members, preferring to keep their secrets. This created additional obstacles in the investigation, as police and Detective Cross relied on information from the suspects to find the rest of the gang. However, despite this, they continued to work tirelessly, hoping to find other evidence and traces that could lead them to the rest of the criminals. Detective Cross knew his next move would have to be carefully considered. He knew that he needed to use all his resources and skills to see the case through and bring all the members of Percy Johnson's gang to justice. The police continued to work intensively on the case, checking every corner and every possibility. They knew their task was difficult, but they were resolute in their quest to find and arrest all members of the gang and bring them to justice for their crimes. When police and prosecutors offered Jack Harrison and Edie Smith a plea deal in exchange for cooperation and disclosure of information about their partners, promising to cut their prison sentences in half, both refused the offer. Jack and Edie remained steadfast in their silence, despite the attractiveness of the deal. Their loyalty to the Percy Johnson gang and their steadfastness in keeping the secret remained unwavering. It was a disappointment for the police and Detective Cross, but they did not lose hope. They continued to work tirelessly, using all available resources and methods to find the remaining gang members and bring them to justice. And while Jack Harrison and Edie Smith could remain silent, the police and Detective Cross knew that they would not stop until they brought all the criminals to justice. After Jack Harrison and Edie Smith refused to cooperate with justice, police and detectives focused on finding the remaining 4 criminals from the Percy Johnson gang. They needed to find them before they committed another crime or disappeared into the shadows. The investigation was intensive and covered a large area. The police launched a wide operation, checking all possible places where the criminals could be hiding. Detectives interviewed witnesses, analyzed evidence and traces, and looked for connections and patterns of behavior that could lead to the criminals. As time passed, the pressure on the police and detectives grew. They knew that every minute was important and they could not let the criminals escape justice. Despite all the efforts of the police and detectives, the search for the remaining 4 criminals from the Percy Johnson gang was unsuccessful. They used all available resources, conducted extensive manhunt operations, and conducted numerous interrogations, but the criminals remained elusive. This was a major disappointment to law enforcement, as they had been resolute in their commitment to bring all gang members to justice. But despite this, they never stopped hoping that in the future they would be able to find the criminals and bring them to justice for their crimes. After many unsuccessful attempts to find the remaining members of the Percy Johnson gang, police and detectives decided to review the available evidence and use new methods for the search. One of the key moments was a chance discovery in the form of surveillance camera footage from one of the bars in the city center. The video footage showed Jake Parker, one of the gang members, suddenly appearing in the city. This was a major breakthrough as it was the first piece of evidence linking the bandit to a specific location. Detectives began a thorough investigation based on this new information. They determined that Parker frequented the area of a certain bar and had connections there. Using mobile data analysis and information from witnesses, they discovered Parker's possible location. Under cover of night surveillance and sting work, police and detectives were raiding the bar when Parker showed up there again. He was arrested without incident and was found in possession of evidence related to the robberies, including weapons and items that were stolen from previous crimes. The arrest of Jake Parker was a huge success for law enforcement, and it prompted them to continue the investigation and search for other criminals from the Percy Johnson gang. After Jake Parker was arrested, detectives interviewed him in hopes that he would cooperate and reveal information about his partners. However, Parker remained adamant and refused to cooperate with law enforcement agencies. During interrogation, he remained cool and silent, not revealing any information about his partners or their plans. This created additional difficulties for the investigation, as evidence and witness statements were insufficient to fully establish their whereabouts and involvement in the crimes. The detectives understood that they needed to use all available methods and resources to get on the trail of the remaining criminals. They continued to analyze available evidence, interview witnesses, and expand their network of informants in the hope that this would lead them to the rest of the gang. Despite Parker's refusal to cooperate, the detectives were determined to see the case through and bring all criminals to justice. They knew that every piece of evidence and every witness could be the key to solving this complex case. After Jake Parker refused to cooperate with detectives, the investigation ran into difficulties. However, detectives did not give up and continued to work persistently to find the remaining members of the Percy Johnson gang. They expanded the pool of suspects by analyzing all available evidence and testimony. One of the key points was the discovery of similar modus operandi in a number of crimes, which indicated that the gang maintained certain patterns in its actions. Detectives also turned to the use of technology, including mobile data analysis and video surveillance, to get on the trail of the bandits. They actively worked with informants and developed covert operations to find the criminals. After many weeks of intense efforts, detectives finally received information about the possible whereabouts of one of the gang members. This was a clue, and they were ready to act. In one of the specially organized raids, police and detectives arrested one of the gang members, and they found evidence related to previous crimes. After the arrest and further investigation, it turned out that the man arrested had no connections with the Percy Johnson gang. This was a major disappointment to law enforcement, who mistook him for a gang member. The police were forced to release him due to the lack of evidence of his involvement in the crimes. This case provided a powerful lesson to detectives about the importance of thoroughly analyzing and testing all available evidence and testimony before arresting suspects. However, this did not stop the police in their quest to find and bring to justice the remaining members of the gang. They continued to work tirelessly, using all available resources and methods to get the job done. Meanwhile, detectives carefully reviewed available information and continued to expand the pool of suspects, hoping to track down the remaining members of the gang and bring them to justice. Emilio Sanchez, who turned out to be another suspect in the Percy Johnson gang case, developed a daring plan to escape abroad. He decided to use the desert areas on the border with Mexico to quietly penetrate the territory of the neighboring country. Sanchez cunningly circumvented border control by organizing a night crossing through desert areas. Armed with only a minimal supply of food and water, he hoped to cross the border and disappear into the depths of the Mexican terrain. However, his attempt to escape was discovered and stopped. Border patrols discovered him at the border when he was already near the entry point into Mexico. They quickly detained Sanchez and turned him over to local law enforcement. This was an important point in the investigation, as Sanchez's arrest opened up new avenues for law enforcement to find the rest of the gang. This incident showed that bandits were still in the country, and the police continued their persistent efforts to nab them. Under pressure from the investigation and in the hope of reducing his prison term, Emilio Sanchez agreed to cooperate. He revealed information about a hidden hideout where two of his partners were located, remaining at large after previous unsuccessful attempts to arrest them. The gang members chose an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city for their hideout. Sanchez described in detail his location and the specifics of the situation, which helped law enforcement agencies prepare an operational arrest. The police immediately organized a raid at the specified address. The special forces carried out a seizure operation, and as a result, the bandits were detained. They were found to have evidence linking them to a series of crimes committed by Percy Johnson's gang. This successful arrest was a major breakthrough in the case. Law enforcement now had every reason to believe that the remaining members of the Percy Johnson gang would be arrested and brought to justice for their crimes. Thanks to the cooperation of Emilio Sanchez and the hard work of law enforcement, the case moved closer to closure and the community gained hope for law and order. When the police and special forces arrived at the indicated shelter, they found only one criminal there, Jimmy McCarty. The suspect was caught by surprise, but even in this difficult situation, he was ready to resist. Even though he was alone against numerous law enforcement officers, McCarty was not going to go down without a fight. He attempted to escape, but was quickly blocked and detained. During the interrogation, it turned out that Jimmy McCarty was really planning to leave America. His arrest occurred at the last moment when he was already preparing to leave the country. Now he was deprived of this opportunity and faced inevitable responsibility for his crimes. McCarty's arrest was the final chord in the long-running investigation into the Percy Johnson gang. The police and detectives successfully dealt with the call, and all gang members were either arrested or brought to justice. This success has become a shining example for law enforcement agencies and society as a whole. He demonstrated that law and order can overcome any obstacle and bring criminals to justice. After successfully arresting all members of Percy Johnson's gang, the police had to find the main villain, Percy Johnson himself. He became something of a ghost for law enforcement. Their efforts aimed at catching him, but every time they got close to his trail, he disappeared, as if vanishing into thin air. Percy Johnson was a master of stealth and skilled at evading surveillance and tracking systems. He did not leave any traces that could help law enforcement agencies locate him. His gangster cunning and flexibility allowed him to evade the law and remain free. However, the police did not give up and continued to work persistently to find Percy Johnson and bring him to justice for his crimes. They used all available resources, including covert operations, intelligence, and cooperation with other law enforcement agencies to get on the trail of a dangerous criminal. For the police, the task of finding Percy Johnson became a priority, since he was the last link in the chain, and his arrest was the key to closing this dark chapter in the history of crime. But their patience and perseverance were tested as Percy continued to escape their grasp, remaining free. Despite all the efforts of the police, Percy Johnson remained at large. Even after a lengthy investigation and many operations to capture him, he skillfully avoided arrest. His capture became one of the longest and most complex investigations in the history of law enforcement. Percy was a master of evasion, and every time the police seemed to be closing in on him, he disappeared without a trace. However, the police were not going to give up. They remained on duty and continued to work to find Percy and bring him to justice for his crimes. For society, Percy Johnson became a symbol of the inability of the legislature to deal with crime. His name became synonymous with impunity and caused a feeling of helplessness among many. Thus, the story of the Percy Johnson gang remained an unresolved chapter in the Book of Crime, and its conclusion remained an open question for justice. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, Percy Johnson remained clumsy and faded into oblivion. Advanced technology and many months of investigation could not lead to his arrest. However, sometime after the last known contact with law enforcement, it became clear that Percy had managed to leave America. According to various sources and testimonies, he fled to Brazil, where he apparently continued his criminal activities under a new name and with new allies. This discovery was a serious blow to law enforcement agencies. They realized that the task of catching him only became more difficult as they had to collaborate with international partners and overcome many legal and bureaucratic obstacles to operate outside their own country. Following the discovery of Percy Johnson in Brazil, American authorities began pressuring the Brazilian government to extradite him. However, their efforts have faced serious legal and political obstacles. Percy, finding himself in such a situation, was ready to defend his rights and freedom. He was able to take advantage of Brazilian legislation that prohibited the deportation of citizens to countries where they would face serious violations of their rights and freedoms. Moreover, Percy managed to start a family in Brazil. He got married and had a child. Given these circumstances, the Brazilian authorities refused to respond to American demands for the extradition of Percy Johnson. Extradition was not possible due to legal restrictions and protections provided by Brazilian law. This was a serious blow to the American authorities, who were forced to admit that Percy Johnson would remain free, at least within Brazilian territory. For Percy, this was a victory and proof of his cunning and ability to circumvent the law, but for justice, it remained an unfinished chapter in their fight for justice. After Percy Johnson remained at large in Brazil, he became the object of increased public and media attention. His story of a criminal who managed to escape the persecution of American authorities intrigued many and aroused interest in Brazilian society. Percy, taking advantage of his new status, began actively giving interviews to various journalists and television programs. He talked about his life, his adventures, and how he managed to survive difficult times. His story has become the subject of much controversy and discussion in society. Some saw him as a hero who was able to defend his freedom and create a new life in another country. Others viewed him as a criminal who had escaped his well-deserved punishment and was now trying to justify his actions. Regardless of public opinion, Percy remained a charismatic figure capable of attracting attention to himself. His interviews attracted many viewers and readers, and he became one of the most talked-about characters in Brazil. Detective Cross found it difficult to accept that Percy Johnson had so cleverly evaded justice. Every time he saw an interview with an ex-con or read about him in the news, he reminded himself of his failure. This became a major shadow over his career, and he often reflected on what he could have done differently. In interviews following his retirement, Detective Cross spoke candidly about his feelings and thoughts. He admitted that the pursuit of Percy Johnson had become his most important task, and his failure in this matter remained the greatest disappointment of his career. Cross also noted that he and his team were doing everything possible to find and arrest Percy. They reviewed dozens of pieces of evidence, conducted thousands of interviews, and closely watched the criminal's every move. However, despite their efforts, Percy left, leaving them empty-handed and feeling unfulfilled. For Detective Cross, catching Percy Johnson was more than just a job. It was his life's goal, and his failure was a bitter lesson that even the most complex criminal cases can remain unresolved despite best efforts. Percy Johnson departed this world, leaving behind him a legacy of legend. In the last years of his life, he was able to enjoy quiet and peaceful days in Brazil, surrounded by his family and close friends. He lived a dignified and happy life, leaving behind the shadows of his past and his criminal exploits. Percy Johnson's death did not mark the end of his story, but rather opened a new chapter. His personality and his deeds will remain etched in the memory of people as one of the most striking phenomena of the criminal world. Despite his crimes, he left an indelible mark on history, attracting interest and admiration from some and condemnation from others. For Detective Cross, the death of Percy Johnson marked the end of their eternal game of cat and mouse. He realized that although he could not catch the criminal in the flesh, he was able to maintain his integrity and honesty in the fight for justice. His story with Percy Johnson was not just the captain of his career, but also a lesson he learned carefully. Never give up, even if the path to victory seems impossible. Thus ended the story of Percy Johnson, a criminal who became a legend. His name will remain in the memory of many as a symbol of the fact that even the darkest deeds can be forgotten under the weight of time, but his life and adventures will always inspire people and arouse their interest in the mysteries of human destiny.